I could hardly visit Glasgow without taking a look at the busiest station in Scotland, Glasgow Central. And with a customer satisfaction score of 95.2%, that makes it, in a sense, the best station in the UK. Let's take a dive into the history of this Glasgow landmark. Well, the first thing to say is that were it not for an argument, it might not have existed at all. The story begins with another station, one that no longer exists. On the other side of the River Clyde was Bridge Street, which had been opened by the Glasgow and Paisley Joint Railway in 1840. Through various mergers and takeovers, Bridge Street was jointly owned by the Caledonian Railway and the Glasgow and South Western Railway by the 1860s. And neither was particularly happy with their situation. Both companies wanted a city centre terminus. I mean, every mainline railway does, because that's where the money is. Glasgow was an industrial powerhouse called the Second City of Empire. It was the largest port in Scotland, and the Clyde was the centre of the British shipbuilding industry. And in the 19th century, shipping was the key to the prosperity and power of the British Empire. A railway into the city proper was, the companies reasoned, a licence to print money. Ironically, though, the very reason Glasgow was a prosperous city was also the reason they couldn't get into it. Building a bridge across the Clyde could be hazardous to shipping. The Admiralty were strongly opposed. So too were the Clyde Navigation Trust, though they had ulterior motives. The Clyde steamers were the major mode of passenger transportation at the time, and they weren't about to let the competition in without a fight. On the banks of the river sat the industries that brought the city its wealth, so the Glasgow Corporation opposed the notion of driving a busy main line straight through that. Meanwhile, all was not well between the two railway companies. As so often happened, sharing a station had seemed like a great idea at the start. But as the railways expanded, it became an increasing irritation, like when you get a hotel room with someone who snores. There were too many trains, not enough platforms. In short, this station was not big enough for the two of them. The Glasgow and South Western took the lead in the plan to obtain a city station. They would own the station, and the Caledonian would pay to use it. The Cali felt that they were getting ripped off, so much so that they decided they'd be better off just building their own station. "Fine," said the Glasgow and South Western, and beetled off to their own station at St Enoch. In 1866, the Cali designed their own station to be called Gordon Street, but they'd have to fight for it. The bridge across the Clyde, designed by William Arrol of the Forth Bridge, was extremely costly. It had to be built high above the water so as not to interfere with shipping, at the insistence of the Admiralty. And on top of the cost of building it, they had to pay £95,000 in compensation to the Clyde Navigation Trust. It would be 13 years before the first trains would depart from their new station in August 1879. The station was built on the site of Grahamston Village, and a Glaswegian urban legend has it that the abandoned village can still be found in the arches beneath the station. I mean, it can't, but it's a good story. So remember how I said that Bridge Street couldn't handle the number of trains as traffic increased? Well, that problem never went away. Soon the 8 platforms of Glasgow Central just weren't enough. Just 11 years after opening, in 1890, the station was widened and a 9th platform was put in, but this could only ever be a temporary solution. In 1896, the low-level platforms were built to serve the Glasgow Central Railway. This had been an independent line, but before any track had been laid, the company was taken over by the Caledonian Railway, which gave them a line through the centre of the city. By the end of the 90s, the 1890s that is, the Cali decided to take proper action. From 1899 to 1905, the station was rebuilt in a massive programme of expansion. The new station was designed by Donald Mathieson on the engineering side, with J. Miller as the architect. This, substantially, is the station we have today. It was built with 13 platforms, an extra bridge across the Clyde, a new office block, and an extended hotel. Oh yes, the hotel, I should probably talk about that. If you had a grand terminus, you needed a grand hotel. That's just how it was done. Of course, it was also a good way to extract more money from passengers, particularly the wealthy ones. The Grand Central Hotel was the Caledonian's offering in Glasgow. It was designed by Robert Rowand Anderson. Anderson had worked under George Gilbert Scott, which I mention only because Scott would design his very own impressive hotel at St Pancras in London just a few years before Anderson's. The hotel was originally supposed to be offices, but the Cali decided it was too grand for that. I dare say they also wanted a response to the Glasgow and South Western's hotel at nearby St Enoch. It opened at the same time as the station and, as I say, was expanded at the same time. In 1927, John Logie Baird sent the first long-distance television signal from here in London to the Grand Central. So, what of the station? Well, it probably says a lot for the design that there really isn't much to say about it for most of the 20th century. Most of the classic features remain to this day, including the bridge over Argyle Street, known as the Highlandman's Umbrella, and the kiosks and booking hall. In 1905, Bridge Street closed as it was felt that Central rendered it redundant. After the First World War, the station gained the Shell. It's a howitzer shell made by William Beardmore & Co. that was used as a charity collecting box and became a popular meeting place. In 1923, the Caledonian Railway was taken over by the London, Midland and Scottish Railway. Since 1862, Central had been the terminating point of the prestigious express train known as the Royal Scot. From 1936, this was joined by the high-speed streamlined service, the Coronation Scot. But this wasn't just for long-distance travellers, and plenty of commuter services used it too. In the 1960s, electrification came to Glasgow Central, and in 1960 the famous blue trains were introduced. Officially called Class 303s, these were icons of the Glasgow commuter lines. Like most major termini, Central handled post, and the London to Glasgow post route has two major claims to fame. In 1936 it was the subject of the GPO documentary Night Mail and the W.H. Auden poem that is, if anything, even more famous than the film it was commissioned for. And in 1963 a somewhat darker event, the Great Train Robbery. But even Glasgow Central couldn't escape the transport policy of the 1950s and 60s. The railways of Britain had been nationalised in 1948, and the new owners had inherited a vast and unwieldy empire. Cutbacks were the short-sighted solution to a money-losing system. Between 1959 and 1964, the Glasgow Central Railway was closed, though it would be partially reopened in 1979. Gradually, the station became more and more dingy. Even the hotel would start to show signs of neglect. Still, Glasgow Central got off relatively lightly compared to some of the other big stations. Buchanan Street and our old friend St Enoch would be closed altogether and ultimately demolished. In the 1980s, the station would be renovated, and from 1998 to 2005, an even bigger renovation would take place. This would involve the total renewal of the roof. The works would win the prestigious Europa Nostra European Cultural Heritage Award for their attention to detail and respect for the station's history. In 2006, the Glasgow Airport Rail Link was authorised. For Glasgow Central, this meant improving capacity by rearranging the platforms, adding a new one and re-signalling. Unfortunately, in 2009 the link was cancelled, but at least the station got its upgrade. At present, it seems likely that if the link is revived, it will be as a light rail line. So that's Glasgow Central. It has to be said that relative to some of the stations I've talked about, its history has been fairly uneventful. A couple of overhauls, but very little of substance. And that's no bad thing. It shows that this is a station that's fit for purpose, and always has been. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If so, please do click the like button and consider subscribing for more. I'd like to thank my donors on Ko-fi and Patreon. You are the Clyde Bridge to my inner city terminus. And I'll see you all again very soon. Cheerio.